Hi.
Hi, Shakti.
Hi, Rick. So, you are such a privileged witness of the spiritual arena. You interview every week beautiful beings that explore the journey of consciousness in their own way, in various paths. And I think there is a few people like you that can have actually like a clear view on what is happening right now in spirituality, at least in the West. I would like to ask you, what is, in your feeling, the direction in which us as consciousness is moving? Consciousness seems to be blossoming a lot in the latest years, and there are more and more people saying that awakening has been happening or it's stabilizing. And so I really would like you to know in which direction you feel that consciousness is moving right now.
Well, first of all, I want people to know who you are. You are Shakti Katarina Maggi, and
Yeah.
I've interviewed you on Bat Gap. And people watching this would probably like to go and watch that interview if they haven't done so already. And also on Bat Gap, there's a page for that interview where they can link to your website. They can follow the link to your website and everything like that.
Thank you.
And we're out here in California at the Science and Non-Duality Conference, and we've met in person for the first time, and it's really been delightful. We've had breakfast together and had a chance to talk a little bit. Well, I've just started thinking along these lines recently in the last week or so. I've been thinking along these lines of what I'm about to say for a long time, but I've just sort of come up with a metaphor that I think helps to explain it a little bit better. Ever since the invention of nuclear weapons, it's been possible for humanity to wipe itself out. Before that, it wasn't possible. There's plenty of wiping out taking place, but more localized. But we managed not to do that for 70 years or so that's good. However, now we've devised other ways of wiping ourselves out. And there are many serious scientists and even announcements by the United Nations and all, saying that we may well be on the verge of doing that with climate change. And there will be many ramifications from climate change in terms of mass migrations of people who are flooded out of cities and serious problems with hunger as crops are no longer growable due to drought and inappropriate weather and all kinds of things like that. We can go on in the details, but I'm sure most people have heard them. So it's as if the Earth itself, if we think of it as a living being, is in a serious crisis mode. And many of us do think of it as a living being, or her as a living being, with an intelligence and an ability to adapt and respond to situations. So, in my opinion, the epidemic or upsurge of spirituality that seems to be happening around the world is really the Earth's immune system kicking in. And people who are participating in that awakening are like white blood cells or something that are going through them, an influence is being generated which could potentially, counterbalance the situation and save us in the nick of time. Now, people don't always survive diseases, and the Earth may not survive this one. But if it has a chance of surviving, I think it's not going to be through politics, it's not going to be through economics, it's not going to be merely through technology, although all those things will be involved, but it's going to be through something that's fundamental to all of those things and to everything, which is consciousness.
And I completely agree with you. And I would say that it seems like that consciousness now, also in non-duality, also I would say in every ramification of spirituality, is also interested more and more, not just in the transcending of the sense of separation, but in the inclusion of life in spirituality. So life as the expression of the highest spiritual part of us. So life as the embodiment of this consciousness. Would you like to comment on this? Because it seems that also here in Science and Non-Duality Conference, this has been addressed as attendance. The title of this year was The Mystery of the Human Being. So it seems like life and nature and human development must be really included in spirituality and not something that is what we try to go away from when we go in spirituality.
Yeah.
So, what would you like to say?
Well, I was eating breakfast this morning with Zaya Benazzo, who she and her husband Maurizio are the organizers of the Science and Non-Duality Conference. And in the opening session of the conference, the two of them gave a talk about how their orientation to the conference has evolved over the past 10 years that they've been doing it. And she said that in the beginning they very much had a neti-neti kind of orientation, not this, not this. It's all non-dual, the world is an illusion, let's just get down to the transcendent and not worry about the world or about our humanity or anything else, because why bother about something that's an illusion? But they and many others have begun to realize that that is not non-duality. Obviously, if we're excluding something, then we're separating it from something else, and we have duality. So non-duality would have to be inclusive of everything, including our humanness, our humanity, and all sorts of interesting things which we talk about at this conference, and which we in this, who are talking about these kinds of things all year long, are interested in. And so I think that consciousness, or whatever we want to call it, has relevance to every field of human endeavor, every field of knowledge, every field of experience, because it's sort of the lifeblood of everything. It's the foundation of everything. Now, obviously, there are people at the conference who discuss the idea that some think that consciousness is just a product of the brain and that matter is the foundation of everything. There are many on the cutting edge who feel it's the other way around. Consciousness is the foundation of everything, and then matter comes along, and then eventually brains.
Probably this misunderstanding is coming because they intend consciousness as human consciousness.
Right.
So I could agree that human consciousness as expression, like consciousness in the human being, comes from matter. But I would say that for people like us that know that consciousness is just openness and void, you can't really say that matter, the consciousness comes from matter, but matter comes from emptiness, that is consciousness. So probably it's just maybe a matter of terminology of what we intend. Yeah.
Also, for someone whose whole worldview is that, matter is real, and that things that can't be touched or measured shouldn't be taken seriously, it's very difficult for them to discuss the possibility that consciousness is more real than anything and is the foundation of everything. But it shouldn't be that difficult because, for over 100 years now, scientists have been talking about the quantum field and, all kinds of things that are very difficult to measure. And even now, the Higgs boson was recently discovered. Certain things, point made. And there's an analogy I often use, I think I used it in my talk at the conference, which is that in Ptolemaic astronomy, that system of understanding where the Earth was thought to be the center of the solar system, it was really difficult to understand the movements of the planets because they seemed to be stopping and going backwards and going in little loops and doing all kinds of strange things. But once it was understood that the sun is the center of the solar system, all of a sudden the planets were moving in these nice, beautiful ellipses, and everything was a lot simpler. So there are a lot of anomalies, psi phenomena, and NDEs, and all kinds of interesting things that make no sense to a materialist who feels that matter is predominant and consciousness is just a chemical function of the brain. But if consciousness is understood as fundamental, then the whole thing is flipped on its head, and all these anomalies begin to find a place and can be understood and can be seen not as conflicting with scientific understanding, but as being an extension of our human quest to know how the universe works. I don't know if I've drifted from your original question,
No,
but
no,
this
no.
is kind of stuff interests me.
It makes such a sense, because the thing is, like, once we understand, we realize that the foundation of everything is pure consciousness, is nothingness, then all the rest makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely true, because in the sense, as you said, in quantum physics, since 100 years, we know that basically matter is void, is nothingness. I heard like several scientists reminding this these days. So it's not so weird to say that. I would say that what is interesting maybe is the possibility to find, as humans, to find really the foundation of our being in this transcendence, and from this transcendence that join us all in the being able to approach the problems that we have on the planet as a we, and no more as a separate entity that is moving. Mm-hmm. And this is happening more and more. And I think this inclusion that the teachers do of like life and human brokenheartedness and vulnerability is something that is letting consciousness to know more and more the manifested aspect as something that must be included in spirituality, and not just transcended, but transformed in the heart.
Yeah, and if you ignore it, it's not going to go away.
No, it's the strongest
Can't
duality.
sweep it under the rug.
To me, it's the strongest duality to separate non-duality from life.
Yeah.
That's not true non-duality. So I agree with you. I would like to ask you something else. You have been like spending quite some time recently in exploring what is the role of a teacher. You have been meeting many teachers in these years that you've been interviewing them, and of course everybody has their own style and everybody has their own way to share their experience. But it seems that sometimes there are like common vices that we see, and often they are about sexuality and money and abuse of power of any sort. And with other people, you are like creating a kind of movement to let the community to think about it and to see if it's possible to settle a kind of standard, of course in the freedom of everybody to be themselves. Would you like to comment that?
Yeah. You and I were just talking to Rupert Spira at the doorstep of the hotel there for about 15 minutes, and he was talking about how he spent about 12 or 13 years with his teacher, Francis Lucille, with no thought of teaching, and he had already sort of had non-dual realization, but he was just sort of attending dozens and dozens of retreats and spending all this time. And at one point, Francis said to him that, you didn't know it, but you were actually becoming qualified as a teacher by doing that. And then eventually, finally, Rupert came out and started teaching. And he was commenting that these days with the internet, so many people, often young people, have some kind of glimpse or some kind of realization, and they quit their day job and rush right into being a teacher because it's kind of a cool thing to do, and it's inspiring. And I mean, I myself became a meditation teacher at the age of 21 and taught for 25 years, but I made no claim to any kind of realization or anything. I was just teaching a technique that I had been taught. But unfortunately, we've seen that in the whole spiritual minefield of teachers and movements and organizations and all this stuff, it's been a crazy scene many times. There have been situations in which people have been hurt physically, emotionally, sexually, financially, and this is, spirituality should be something beautiful. It should be about God and devotion and oneness and upliftment and even saintliness and all those beautiful qualities that we ideally associate with it. But it's been quite the disillusionment for many people that it hasn't been that way very much.
It's interesting because in the world we spoke a lot about the Me Too movement, mm-hmm. and has been quite all over the planet, mm-hmm. and it seems like it's involving the spiritual realm as well.
It is, yeah.
And it's interesting because of course a teacher is still a human being, and he has or she has his own faults or karmic residue to work on. And it doesn't mean that it cannot teach if they are present. I would say that probably, in my perception, a liberated soul is very rare on the planet, and it could be even hard for that soul to remain on the planet because it would have like no duality to be able to manifest as a body. But this is an entire story. Maybe we speak about it another time.
Well, there have been saints like Anandamaima or Ramana who were just really out of it for a long time, and Anandamaima often had to be fed and so on, and Neem Karoli Baba would kind of wander off into the forest if somebody didn't keep an eye on him, and Ramana spent his first period was sitting in a cave with insects chewing on his legs, and he was oblivious to that, and then he spent years and years and years in a cave before he began interacting with the public. So these are examples that are inspiring and interesting, but none of us are going to do that.
No, of course.
And we're living lives in the world with all kinds of interactions and responsibilities and things that those people didn't have to deal with.
Yeah, and anyway, like that would be like an entire subject, and I would have something to comment on what you say, but I will not, because I would like to come back to speak about this, because what I wanted to say is that, like in my perspective, and I want to know what you feel about it, the guru is a function. From darkness to light, and the guru function. It literally
means that guru.
Yeah, exactly.
Darkness, light.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So guru. So it means that this function of the guru, that is not a person, is a function of consciousness itself, can work through bodies that are not perfectly integrated in awakening, and it's about like the student then like to be able to access to that and recognizing even these faults in the teacher, and being able, like, not to, in a sense, stopping accessing to the energy because the tool is not perfect, theoretically. Yeah. But it's not easy because the student doesn't know. He doesn't know the difference, so it's very open and vulnerable, and it's not easy to distinguish what is what. Do you have any suggestion as a long-time seeker?
Well, when I became a TM teacher back in my course was in 1970, Maharishi said to us, he said, when there's a war on, when the war is underway, there's no time to train sharpshooters. Just give them a gun and send them out. So he was saying, I realize you guys are a bunch of bozos, but I'm going to give you this technique and I want you to go out and teach people because there's a need for it. Yeah. And we certainly were a bunch of bozos. But we did our best.
Of course.
And Maharishi himself, it turned out, although I didn't see it at the time, was a work in progress and had certain flaws or shadow situations in his life and so on. But he did a great job. I mean, he had a tremendous impact. Yeah. I sometimes think of him as like Babe Ruth, the baseball player who, swung for the fences, and a lot of times he struck out, but he hit a lot of home runs. Yeah. And so I think if teachers are humble enough to acknowledge that they indeed are works in progress and are open to constructive criticism if it comes their way, and don't try to sort of put themselves on a pedestal or allow others to put them on a pedestal, then the whole thing can be very successful. However, if they don't do those things, it can become dangerous for them. It can result, the higher you get on that pedestal, the farther you're going to fall, and you are going to fall. And it can be misleading and a waste of time and money and life for students, although perhaps we learn our lessons that way sometimes. And there are people who've been through some rather serious cult-like scenes who say, it was crazy and I wouldn't do it again, but I'm kind of glad I did it because I learned. I learned.
Yeah, but I totally agree with you that for me, like the secret of any master should be to remain a student forever and
to be what?
To remain a student forever.
Remain a student forever, yes.
Yeah, inside yourself and letting the teaching go through you and being humble enough to know that the only guru is life. Yeah. And I agree with you. But what I would like to know, if you have any tip for the seekers, I mean, a student, what do you do when like you are drawn to a person and you feel you can learn from that person, and you maybe see certain things that don't really like make sense in you. Yeah. And what do? You like in Italy we say this. Do you throw the baby with the dirty water?
Yeah, we have the same phrase.
Yeah. Okay.
Throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah. What do you do?
Sometimes you might want to. I mean, You don't want that baby.
Yeah.
But other times, I think and again, it also depends on whether the teacher is honest about the fact that he or she is a work in progress. If they claim perfection and aren't willing to listen to any criticism or feedback, then the whole situation could get worse and worse and crazier, as many have done. And so you might not want to stick around that scene. And some people are going to anyway. I mean, anybody can start saying anything and they'll get followers. But I think if you're really sincere about spiritual development, if you really want it, and you don't just want a sort of a daddy figure or a cool bunch of people to hang out with or something like that, but you really want liberation or realization to whatever extent it's possible for you, then you should do your best to culture discernment and discrimination and feel free to question.
Yeah.
And if your questions are seen as threats or attacks or something, even though you're asking them politely, then that's a warning sign. A teacher should be able to, or really, in my opinion, a healthy student-teacher relationship should be one in which the student feels free to ask anything, and whether it's skeptical or not, and as long as it's done in a mature and respectful way. I mean, you don't want to just be a troublemaker that's just sort of trying to disrupt the whole scene. But if you're sincere, and the teacher is sincere, then there should be that trust and honesty where you can ask anything and get some kind of a decent answer. And because a big part of realization is having your doubts dispelled. There are layers after layers and after layers of doubts in us, and they need to be kind of cleared away layer after layer. And a trusting relationship with a teacher is a process through which they can be cleared.
I totally agree with you, and I would say in my own experience with my teacher, like seeing vasana, vasanas in him,
which, in case people don't know, means like latent impressions that sort of are lodged in the nervous system and might tend to influence your behavior.
Yeah. So it helped me to embrace my own humanity. So it didn't shadow the light that was shining through him, and actually was, in a sense, his most beautiful gift.
Yeah.
I never saw him harming anybody, so he never like intentionally harmed anybody, and I thought unintentionally he might have make somebody angry because the ego reacts sometimes to being destroyed. So I never saw that, but some inclination, and that helped me to be very in touch with myself and understanding that it's not about perfection as the mind thinks of. It's about inclusion in the heart of anything. So I'm totally with you on this. What I would like to ask you is, what do you think that, or what do you feel that would be, in a sense, it's hard to say, absolute boundaries that a teacher shouldn't cross? I try to be more specific on this. The non-dual teaching in particular is very open. There is no, let's say, an academy that says, you are a non-dual teacher, no, you're not entitled to be a non-dual teacher. And it's all very loose and open, and is actually changing in the time, as you say before, maybe some years ago, there was more an inclination towards just transcending everything. Now there seems to be also an inclination and orientation communally in including things. So things change all the time, as I think consciousness is learning about itself through us more and more. So say this, do you feel that in this moment, at least, the truth of this moment, that there are absolute boundaries to a behavioral teacher that shouldn't be crossed? What is?
Okay, well,
because I just say this more, because sometimes, is say this spirituality, you cannot judge an enlightened soul, because even if an enlightened soul is doing something that is apparently very bad, like sleeping with the wife of somebody else, or behaving in a way that seems to be not nice to you, someone say you cannot judge it because it's life force, is the universe acting through that to delete the image of you.
Yeah.
I'm not agreeing or disagreeing. It's like an open question to me, and I would like to know how you feel about it.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's funny because there's somebody whose interview I took down because I got a pretty reliable report that he was doing some rather disturbing things. I mean, not terrible, but along the lines of the stuff you were talking about, you know, sleeping with women behind the scenes and messing around, and I just, you know, it's like when I do an interview with somebody, it's like a referral, and I don't feel like referring people to somebody who might take advantage of them or hurt them in any way.
Of course, yeah.
But I ended up corresponding with the guy a little bit afterwards, and one of his comments was, "Who are you to judge an awakened person?" You know, like basically, dude, I can do whatever I want, and you know, you don't understand how the way somebody like me operates. Now it's funny because in the Vedic literature, you read these stories in the Puranas and the Itihasas, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana and all, and they constantly pull the rug out from under you in terms of getting too comfortable making assumptions about the way things should be and the way even enlightened teachers should behave. But having said that, at the same time, I think that there are certain standards, and they're also very beautifully illustrated in that literature and in the literature of other traditions around the world, and certain universal ethics about how we treat others, and you know, the Golden Rule and the Ten Commandments and all kinds of things like that in various traditions. And there's a reason for these things, even if you want to say a selfish reason, because unethical behavior harms you as much as it harms them. It's like a knife that's sharp on both ends and doesn't have a handle. You stab somebody with it, but you also cut your hand.
Beautifully said. Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
And so you may need to do a comeback on that question and make sure I've got it.
Yeah. I mean, like, I'm totally with you that, like, in my perspective, there are boundaries. That's what I feel. And these boundaries are not like following necessarily the human ethics that changes anyway from countries to countries.
Yeah, there's a culture.
Yeah.
I mean, in some countries, polygamy is normal, and even in the Vedic literature, the Pandavas' 5 brothers were married to 1 woman, and they also had other wives, and it was this whole scene that wouldn't really work in the USA.
Yeah, but at the same time, I feel, for instance, like quoting you before, that honesty is something that should not be questionable. I mean, if I sleep with your wife, you know, and I shouldn't hide it.
That's an interesting point.
At least,
yeah.
You know, like because that is like brings up a question: who am I protecting when I'm hiding something?
Yeah.
And that for me is ego. So.
I heard an interesting story. There's a very well-respected spiritual teacher, now deceased. I won't mention his name, but he was, you know, having private sessions with various students, and there was this one young woman who was having private sessions with him, and they would do gazing. You know, they'd gaze at each other for a couple of hours or whatever. And at one point, he just said, "I'm totally in love with you, you know, and I want to sleep with you," and so on. And she said, "Well, maybe, but it has to be an open. We have to, you know, you have to tell your wife, you have to tell the other students if this is gonna happen." And he was like, "No way, I can't do that." So I don't know if that somehow addresses your point.
Yeah. I think that's the point, because in a sense, like, I mean, unavoidably, I would say that a teacher is the perfect mirror of projection. There are like endless people that will misunderstand you, misjudge you, will project their mom and dad on you endlessly, and often maybe they don't have a perfect relationship with mom and dad. And so you will receive this projection, and maybe you will even end up, if you're not still enough, without wanting, acting those projections, because you're very open both ways. I don't think it's just the student that is open. I think it's also the teacher that is very vulnerable and open. So it's like it's working both ways. So I would say that for me, like when you hear stories about teachers, the point is if there is a clarity and a honesty and say, no, that actually never happened, or yes, this happened, it stands a line very clear in which, there is no idea of a personalization of the action. Because when you hide in something, it's because you think you have been doing it, in my perspective. So there is a sense of separation there. And that sense of separation in hiding creates then illusion and more separation. Unavoidably, you have gossip about teachers. I'm sure there are gossips around me, and maybe I don't even know them. But
I wouldn't even be.
Yeah, and then that's who cares? But
you don't want to know.
Yeah, maybe I don't want to know. I don't know. But what I'm saying is that if you are transparent, in that is at least a guarantee.
Yeah, it's something. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that all the behavior is right, even if you're transparent about it. I mean, there was, orgies around Trungam Rinpoche and Adida and so on. And everybody knew what was going on. It wasn't a big secret, but was that really a healthy environment?
Yeah.
Was that really good? So in terms of any kind of absolute guidelines of what is or is not appropriate, I don't know if anything's absolute. But what we've tried to do with this Association of Professional Spiritual Teachers is come up with a code of ethics that's, reasonable in light of our culture, in light of common sense, and in light of, with the motivation that people don't get hurt or taken advantage of in any way, and that, teachers should at the very least not be hurting people, they should be helping people, and so on. And it's a work in progress. These guidelines are not going to be, they're not cut in stone, coming down from Mount Sinai. There's something which could always be revised or improved or clarified or something.
Yeah.
But the feeling was just, there needs to be something more in the conversation.
At least in the field.
Yeah, it should just be more out there so that we're all talking about this and that we think about it and that maybe we prevent some of these train wrecks that have been happening.
I would like to have a last question for you. Very often, especially in non-duality, is clearly said, you either see it or you don't. But then you have, and it's true, you either see it or you don't. But then there is almost an endless variation of integration of this seeing. And there are many different teachers that express this integration on their own level. And I'm just curious about your impression on it, because there are so many new teachers and so many also already established teachers around. And sometimes, because it seems that integration is different, it seems like they're almost even contradicting each other. Yeah. So, what is what?
Well, firstly, in terms of seeing it or you don't, even the seeing of it is going to differ from person to person, aside from any question of integration.
Yes.
And that there's explanations of that in terms of the constituents of one's physiology, whether different gunas are predominant, and so on. For some, there might be an emphasis on no sense of a personal self, and others it might seem very much, I am that. There is a sense of I, but it's universal, and others, might see the world as illusory, and others might see the world as divine, and they've all had a realization, but they have different hardware through which that realization is being experienced, and so therefore it has different qualities. What I'm saying is, I think even though the ultimate reality is one and the same, even the cognition of it might vary according to one's makeup. But then, in terms of integration, I guess different people have different ways in which integration is needed. We all have different faculties, and they're all developed to different degrees and in different ways. And we all have different functions to serve in this life. We're not all going to be or do or say the same thing. Yeah. And so, there's always going to be variety. In fact, what I've observed in awakened people, and even I don't even like the term awakened because it's too static.
Yeah.
It has this kind of superlative.
People in awakening.
Final awakening. What I've observed is that people become more vivid, more full of differences in a way, with that underlying energy of the self having awoken, their personalities become more colorful, less drab. So it's kind of like the Peruvian jungle where there's plenty of rain and the soil is rich and there's just this proliferation of variety of beautiful flowers and all beautiful plants and trees and animals and all that. So I think an awakened world would be kind of like that, metaphorically speaking. There would just be, we wouldn't all become the same or believe the same or think the same or like the same things or anything else. There'd be tremendous flourishing of creativity and individuality and difference and all, but there would be this kind of unifying harmony, underlying harmony that would harmonize. Well, that's what harmony does. It would harmonize all these differences so that they would coexist peacefully and coherently without all the conflict and strife and nonsense that ruins our world today.
I ask you this, I resonate with what you say. I ask you this because I think that sometimes for a student it's hard because like you find a teacher that seems to make sense and is saying one thing, and then you have another teacher seems to make sense, maybe they have like the essence is very similar, but then it seems to contradict the other. And sometimes it's confusing. You say, who you believe in who, to who you believe, to like, how do you follow that? And so I was interested in your perspective in this differentiation.
Well, I talk to so many hundreds of people, and they all have different perspectives, but I put it all in a bigger basket. I feel like, try to look at it with a God's eye view. God, if we think of God as the sort of all-pervading intelligence that contains the whole universe within its or his or her wholeness, then all the differences of opinion and religion and philosophy and everything else all fit in there as components. They may seem to clash if you're. Well, let's take another example. A wheel, like a bicycle wheel.
Yes.
If you're out on one of the spokes, it looks like you're separate from all the other spokes. You don't seem to be connected to them.
Yes.
But if you're at the hub, where all the spokes come out, then you see, oh yeah, this spoke comes from me, and this spoke comes from me, and they all serve a purpose. Without them, the wheel wouldn't be a functional wheel. Yeah. And they're all necessary.
Yeah. It's very beautiful. Thank you as a metaphor, and this actually makes me feel like to make you the very last question is this: as a student, as a seeker, as a student, sometimes you're told, don't go in spiritual supermarket and shop with various teachers. And speaking about variety, that's why it came into my mind to say.
Because you'll be a dilettante, you'll be a superficial dabbler.
Yeah, yes. And then you take, I take this is good for me, then oh no, that's too dangerous, I go to another one. Yeah. And say, stick with one guru, stick with one teaching, go to the very essence of it, and that's it. Yeah. What's your comment on it?
I think it depends on the stage that you're at. And I think there could be a stage at which that is really good advice and you shouldn't just be hopping around. But then maybe even before that stage, you should be hopping around because you don't just want to go commit to the first person you see. You might want to, do a little window shopping before you decide to purchase. Yeah. But then you might reach another stage at which you are kind of stable in your understanding and your practice and everything else, and you might find it enriching to, get involved in learning all the different diversities and varieties of spirituality and so on. So I think a person just has to, whatever you do, I think it's good to dig deep and find a practice that works for you and pursue it diligently. If you're serious about this stuff, just take it seriously and as seriously as you would need to take anything that you want to master, like playing the piano or playing tennis or anything else. You're not just going to get it overnight. I think I've answered that question.
Yeah. It's all about sincerity, I would say. Then.
Yeah, that's the key point. This thing we said, discernment is very important. I think sincerity, having an ardent desire. If this is what you really want. It doesn't mean you can't have anything else, but make this a priority. There's a saying my teacher used to say, highest first. You know, there's all kinds of choices, and you can't choose them all at once, but take the highest and do that. And, you know, maybe you'll be able to do a few of these other things also, but make sure that the highest is given priority.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been very inspiring to speak with you.
Thank you, Shakti.
Thank you. And
glad we could do this.
Thank you for the service you do with Buddha the Gas Pump. Is an incredible opportunity for people to meet all the gems that are available. So thank you for your service.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's my joy.
And thanks everybody for listening to this.
Thank you.
Thank you.